Board of Commissioners for Monday, December the 11th, 2017. As is our custom, we'll begin our meeting with a moment of silence. Thank you. I'd like to ask the members of Girl Scout Troop 907, Brownies, if you all would come up and join me here. We have Jane, Emmeline, Eva, Olga, and Penelope, and Ava. Okay? And the Scouts are going to assist us with the Pledge of Allegiance. And so,
please stand.
Yes, take off your hat. Okay, let's turn to the flag.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I think we have a few minutes to talk about what municipal government does, and big business are always a really important part of that, and a very thick agenda package. But we talked about it, and we're very pleased to have you here tonight, and pleased also to have parents and other people who come here. So thank you all for being here and having this meeting with us, and you're welcome to stay as long as you like. So that's very interesting. Our first matter is the setting of the consent agenda. So is there a motion to approve the agenda or to modify it in some way? Moved by Michael Fiocco. Seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Our next order of business is the installation of mayors and commissioners. And so we have an oath in our packages. And assuming that you find my oath. Shall we come out into the back? Wait a minute.
Repeat after me, please. I, Cindy S. Perry,
I, Cindy S. Perry,
do solemnly affirm
that
I will support and maintain
I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and the laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully
and that I will faithfully
discharge the duties of my office
discharge the duties of my office
as mayor of the town of Pittsburgh.
as mayor of the town of
So
Pittsburgh.
help me God.
So help me God. Thank you.
I, Pamela A. Baldwin,
I, Pamela A. Baldwin,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge
that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as Commissioner of the Town of Pittsburgh,
as Commissioner of the Town of
so
Pittsburgh.
help me God.
So help me God.
Repeat after me, please. I, Michael A. Fiocco,
I, Michael A. Fiocco,
do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and laws of the United States,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and I will faithfully discharge
and I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as Commissioner of the Town of Pittsburgh,
as Commissioner of the Town of Pittsburgh.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Carrying that information to speak now, the board needs to choose a mayor pro tem. I was explaining to Bill Scout that the mayor pro tem takes care of the business of the town. We ask him to be mayor, which several times this summer we lean heavily upon the expertise of him involved. So do I hear a motion with respect to the election of the mayor pro tem?
I'd like to nominate Pamela Baldwin.
Second.
Moved by Bette Wilson Foley, seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Take back out now.
And I believe at this time, the town clerk will administer the oath.
I, Pamela A. Baldwin,
I, Pamela A. Baldwin,
solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of my office as Mayor Pro Tem
of my office as Mayor Pro Tem
of the Town of Pittsburgh,
of the Town of Pittsburgh.
so help me God.
So help me God. Thank you very much. Now we are looking for a motion to approve the rest of the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Jay Farrell,
Second.
seconded by Bette Wilson Foley.
Oh, good question.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Would that be under old business? I move friendly amendment to the approval of the agenda that we add the ordinance, the draft resolution on great dividend, thank you, in dividend policy to the agenda.
And is that in accord with the maker of the motion and the second? Then with that one adjustment,
We'd like to make it.
let's make it number one under old business, because I understand that Paul Horn is not able to be with us this evening, and so we'll be receiving the information that was in our agenda package, but he will not be making a presentation. Why don't we put it there? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Do I have the citizens who have signed up? This is the time for citizens matters, and the following people. There are 3 people who have signed up. Steve Walker being one, and Steve, if you will come to the podium.
Good evening. The issue I came here for, I think, is the one that Mr. Bonas just added to the agenda. I want to be considerate of all your time, so I was just going to say that I'm here in the back, and I'm part of an organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, that's worked with a number of jurisdictions to do similar resolutions. So I'm here to be a resource if it's at all helpful, but I don't feel like I need to make a sales pitch. I know, Mayor Perry, you've just been doing a lot of exciting work on the same issue. So I was just going to say that if there's anything we can offer, I'm here with another friend of mine from Citizens Climate Lobby as well, and I'll just be back there. But if it's, I didn't know process-wise if you'd even know we were hearing. So if there's any extra information that we might be able to give that you need, we're excited that you're ready to make a move on this, and so we're here to be of help if we can.
Ms. Holmes Graybill?
Yeah, I don't need to add anything.
All right. Very good, thank you. Leslie Landis?
Hi, I'm Leslie Landis, 21 Randolph Court, Pittsburgh, North Carolina. Town Board Commissioners and staff, now more than ever before, the residents of Pittsburgh need news about the issues affecting them. In my conversations with people, I hear their questions and realize that many are really hungry for information. They want to know about town priorities and policies and plans regarding water quality and management of water, sewer development, appearance guidelines, and enforcement. They want to know what's happening with Chatham Park and the additional elements. They want to know about roads, transportation, traffic schedules, and agendas for meetings and planning board updates, and information from the rec department and solid waste and regional planning and job and volunteer opportunities, all the stuff that you guys do and do so well. Despite their love for Pittsburgh and their desire to be informed, most Circle City residents know little to nothing about either the day-to-day work of the town or the achievements of the staff and the Board of Commissioners. This is really unfortunate. There's so much work being done by you and so much good and important information to share. Like you, your constituents are busy and not able to attend meetings. By the time they do attend, they may be angry or misinformed or both. Despite best efforts, print media cannot be timely and is not in-depth. Broadcast media does not exist here. The lack of accurate news is creating an information vacuum and likely making your jobs harder as you're required to educate, re-educate, and repeat yourselves to overcome biased gossip and provide the latest information in your engagement with citizens. I realize that getting news out to people is a challenge, and you're not necessarily in that business. However, Thomas Jefferson is quoted as having said, "An informed citizenry is at the heart of a dynamic democracy." So there are some ways Pittsburgh's dynamic democracy can be further nurtured. I'd like to suggest that the town's website could use some reorganization and updating. It would seem past due for a redesign. The town might also consider hiring or contracting with a professional public information officer. I realize that these have budget implications and may not be possible. At any rate, I hope you'll consider them for the coming year. And until then, and even with the aforementioned enhancements, fortunately, the town's Facebook and Twitter accounts can be good outlets for news that Circle City residents can use. Those accounts have a fairly good following, so I hope you'll consider using these social media vehicles for the delivery of more substantive information. As Pittsboro grows, this need for hard news from Pittsboro's town hall will be even more profound, which reminds me of another quote that I use a lot, which is, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the next best time is now. I really respect and admire all that you guys do. I know it's a big lift, and so I thank you and wish you the very best. Thank you.
Thank you. So that ends our hearing of citizens' concerns. Is there anyone else who would like to speak that has not done so? This is a time for next day sharing of updates on various things that have occurred through the town, and traditionally I start with talking about what has occurred during the last period of time since we had a meeting, and I must say that this has just been a whirlwind of a week, because indeed, as Steve and Holmes know, and others of you as well, I had the pleasure of representing Pittsboro at the Chicago Climate Summit, and starting last Sunday, a week ago, and going through Wednesday. It was just an amazing array of speakers and panels. I was pleased to be asked to be on one of them. I tried to explain to them that I was not the mayor of San Francisco, and I was not the mayor of Milwaukee, and that really I thought that other mayors could serve well on the panel and bring more profound thoughts than I could. They insisted, wonderfully enough, that they needed to hear the small town perspective. And that was just an amazing thing to be among, well, there are almost 400 climate mayors, but about 52 were in attendance at the Chicago conference. The ideas that it's just, I'm bursting with respect to various things that I've learned, and that but I want to stop and just tell you just very quickly about one little thing that actually has not anything to do with climate, the climate conference itself, but with respect to what happens when you get in a group of people who are of like mind. We were seated alphabetically at the front of the hall, with me sitting next to the mayor of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and during the various breaks and the times that we had to talk, he and I talked about the fact that oftentimes when people are not listening carefully, I have been recognized as the mayor of Pittsburgh. But and then he told me an amusing story. He's not ever been accused of being the mayor of Pittsburgh, but he told me this wonderful story about how when they were looking at their the history of their town, their city, they received or bought a copy of a wonderful portrait of William Pitt, and they believed that their William Pitt that was granted land rights in their town was William Pitt the Younger. Well, they went out and got this wonderful portrait, beautifully framed, and then they discovered shortly after that it was William Pitt the Elder that was the person who had founded and had the land grant up there in Pennsylvania. And so they got a new picture, put it in the town hall, and they relegated William Pitt the Younger to the space over the water cooler. When he found out that our town was indeed named after William Pitt the Younger, we have a wonderful collaboration to report to you, and that is that he's going to do a ceremony in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to say goodbye to William Pitt the Younger. and that he's going to be shipping it to us
Oh, my goodness.
for our town hall.
Wow. Good.
So it was just one of those symbolic, absolutely wonderful things, and it was symbolic of the collaboration and the whole atmosphere of people coming together for a common cause, which is and it's such an important cause. So I'm sure that I'll be boring you and exciting you over the next little while with nuggets from this conference. And I would like actually to reserve a little bit of time during our retreat in February to talk about some of the things that I learned during the past 4 days. So thank you again for allowing me to do this, and it was just a really amazing week. So are there reports from climate change or any of the other committees? Downtown Business Association?
Well, I can mention that the PBA meeting is this Wednesday at 9 o'clock at the Roadhouse, as it's usually held. Also mention that the Main Street meeting board met last week. There are two things that will be coming forward out of that meeting. A request of the Main Street board to change and expand the Main Street boundary. When it was first established, it was a little odd. Included some properties that seemed, excluded some properties that seemed to be important pieces of the puzzle. And so the boundary is we're going to make a request of the board to make a request of the state to expand the board and be more akin to the original urban center of Pittsboro, which will actually expand it a little bit more. The other thing that we are working on is we've been working on design guidelines for downtown, or Main Street program. That got started when NCDOT was talking about doing circle improvements, and we wanted to just make sure that they didn't do it the DOT way, they did it the way we want it to be done. So we made recommendations on materials and that type of thing. And so we're going to bring together a design guideline and present it to staff and present it to the board, hopefully adopt it. The other thing we want to do is create an overlay zone for the Main Street area. And that's something else we will work on and present to staff, work with staff, and bring to the board for consideration.
Just a small report from the Chatham Affordable Housing Committee. We did meet on last Thursday, and the public is actually invited certainly to attend. Our meetings are the first Thursday of each month, and right now it's in the old agriculture building. Everyone knows where that is, and it was in the auditorium portion of that. So everyone is invited. This is really, really important work that we're trying to do. We're working with Chatham County because they have hired Aspen with the Triangle J Council of Governments. She is leading that particular meeting, and we'll be providing information in reference to affordable housing, and we're going to try to have a policy or in place for not just Chatham County, but Pittsburgh, Fowler City, and Goshen. But we are working toward that goal. So we would like people to come, and as I said, again, it's open to the public. There are certain individuals which are on the committee. We have individuals from Chatham County, individuals from Goshen, and individuals from Fowler City, also commissioners. So we are trying to formulate some type of affordable housing, and we're having, last time we were looking at what Chatham County had actually done in the past in reference to affordable housing. So that was very, very interesting, general overview as to what they've done. And hopefully going forward, of course, this will take a little while to try to make some type of housing policy, affordable housing policy, but we are certainly working on it, and members of the public are invited. And going forward also, we will have different speakers with expertise to talk about, hopefully from different cities, to talk about what their affordable housing policy is, and just to try to bring everything together for Chatham County, Pittsburgh, South City, and Goshen.
What time is that meeting?
It's at 6 o'clock. It's usually from 6 to 8 on
Tuesday or Thursday?
Thursday, on Thursday, first Thursday.
All right. Any other reports?
The Chatham County Climate Advisory Committee continued discussion. They met last week. I was not able to attend, but they continued discussion of the climate action plan that they're working on. And they also reported that the county commissioners adopted the comprehensive plan, which is the land use plan for Chatham County, on November 20th. And there were some significant inputs into that plan by that committee. That's all I have to report from that.
Excellent. Anything else? Then let's proceed to old business. And so the draft resolution that you have before you with regard to carbon fee and dividend, I believe we actually saw this at our last meeting, decided to put it off to this one on the hope that I would have some expertise for them, which I don't have actually. There were a lot of things talked about, and this just may be jargon that is called something else in Chicago. So either Steve or Holmes, could you speak specifically to what carbon fee and dividend is?
So carbon fee and dividend is essentially a form of carbon pricing. The idea is we need to limit our greenhouse gas emissions in some way. And we could do that in different ways. One way to do it is by government regulation. But we think this carbon fee and dividend is the most effective way. It's not a regulatory form of pricing. All it does is place a fee on fuels that emit carbon dioxide or their equivalent form of gas, like methane. And then it collects all that fees into a trust fund and gives them to the American public. So it essentially gives consumers the power to choose which energy sources and which goods made by which types of energy are preferable. So it promises to rapidly transition away from these fuels that are causing climate change to renewable forms of energy.
And it's levied by the governmental group or citizens groups, or how is it structured?
I guess it's the Treasury that would actually collect these fees. Anytime a carbon-based fuel, coal, gas, or oil is introduced into the marketplace, the Treasury would collect a fee on each unit of fuel. The idea is, in our the way our legislation is written, we would start at $15 a ton. Each form of fossil fuel emits a certain amount of carbon dioxide or its equivalent per unit. So we would start at a price of $15 a ton, and that would go up every year. So it would be a steadily rising fee. And the hope is that it would be small enough in the beginning that it would not cause a disruption to the marketplace. But everybody would know that it's going to continue rising, and we need to make a transition. So these fees would be collected every month. They would be distributed to American households, and that would be done by the IRS, I believe. And the Department of Energy would make sure that the units were correct in terms of how much carbon dioxide or its equivalent are being emitted.
Is this distributed by population or by area which has the least I mean, is there an incentive there to become the very least consumer of carbon?
Yeah.
I mean, the incentive, the idea is it's a price signal, rather than trying to go industry by industry and say, how does your industry pollute or emit fossil fuels, which would just be almost impossible. It's coming from so many different places across the board. The idea is, if you get it in the beginning and have a, we'll say, price incentive or price signal, people's ordinary economic decisions, business people's economic decisions, investors' economic decisions, are all going to build in a small and growing, as these go, a preference for greener energy because it's not going to have that to be. The redistribution is on a household level evenly across the entire country. So the idea is...
by citizens, not per capita?
Right, by household.
Oh, it is.
Right. So every household is getting a dividend check. The fee part is charged on fuels. The dividend is what comes back. So that's going to go, like everybody in this room would get their dividend. And the idea is that then you can reinvest that money however you want to, but there'll be an extra little price incentive for you to do it. If let's say you're buying a new car, you might buy a greener car, and it also might be cheaper for the company that uses more green power in making the car to make it, and they can sell it for a lower price. Does that make sense? So it trickles down invisibly. The incentive is there, but people don't have to think about, oh, what's the greenest thing I can buy? They can buy the cheapest thing, like they're usually going to do, and that's going to reflect greener and greener power as that fee goes up. Does that make sense? Okay. Maybe, having talked about this, maybe I will say, for a lot of people, this is a brand new idea. Or part of the reason why, I know it's a little unusual, but part of the reason why we like this idea is our organization's been working with people in Congress for years, and we've been meeting with a whole lot of congressional offices, bipartisan meeting. We're meeting with everybody, and we don't really want to waste time on a plan that's not going to work. And what we found in meeting with people on both sides of the aisle is that something like this has the best and maybe only chance of being something that's going to be agreed upon and passed. So this is an attempt to please everybody and get the problem done, if that makes sense of why. So if we talked about asking Congress to tax carbon and spend the money some different way, there's no consensus on how that money would be spent, and it's not going to work. I mean, and if we were trying to do a whole lot of regulation, I don't think people could agree which business, if you had to pick which businesses are going to be winners and who's going to be losers and things like that. I don't think there'd be any agreement. So the idea here is to just have the market have its say and let consumers, investors, and everybody else in the market dictate what happens from there.
Yeah, I've heard at the Chicago conference a great deal about green fees, which has nothing to do with playing golf, but it's levied at the municipal level, and there are several municipalities that are levying this green fee added to their utility bill, which is a nominal amount of money, $4 or something, in Nashville, Tennessee, as I remember, and I don't know that they've accumulated enough at this point to create a pool for spending, but I guess people will submit plans, and so I'm familiar with that one. There was also a fascinating one about rounding up your utility bill, and they were advocating that if your bill is for $12.02, that you submit $13 to pay your bill, and that extra money goes into a special fee for carbon offsets and other innovative ideas as far as public buildings being climate appropriate, etc.
I think the other thing that we're excited about with this plan is that people actually come out ahead with these dividend checks coming in every month. Even though energy prices are going to rise, and because energy prices are rising, the cost of goods is also rising. people actually get more money in their dividend checks every month than this, the increased cost of goods. And so
Most people do.
yeah, it's been estimated like two-thirds of households will come out ahead. And the ones that don't are those people who are generally wealthier that have a bigger carbon footprint.
Maybe one other thing, when you were talking, I liked the municipalities and, when you met with all these other mayors, you heard people. I like that people are trying to do a lot of things at a local level. At the same time, this is really a global problem. We can't address it at a global level. The idea here is that in addition to whatever people are doing locally, there needs to be some federal level, decisions about this, because some places could do amazing things, and because this is a global problem, it really won't change anything. I'm not trying to criticize it. I'm not trying to say don't do it. What I'm saying is you have to have a solution to the problem on the scale that the problem exists, or it just won't really address it. So I'm not trying to say that I'm against anything like local places doing what they want to do. I think there's all kinds of ways they can do things. But if we don't also, and this is just a call to Congress to adopt something like this. If we don't insist that they do something at a federal level, all of our best efforts could be wasted. And I think, you're talking about great efforts, but they won't make a global difference unless it's something happening on a big scale. Whereas if the United States economy did something like this, it would change economies all over the world. There's a border adjustment. I don't know if we mentioned that too. There's a border adjustment so that in the legislation, if you are an exporter, it's not going to penalize you for paying more on your energy supply here to export your stuff. You would get a rebate on that. Likewise, importers who are importing from places where there's no attention to clean energy would have an extra fee added in so that it's not something that's going to hurt U.S. businesses in any way, importing or exporting. The idea is that it's just leveling the playing field.
Other questions?
John, thanks for bringing this up. I looked into it, read a lot of what you just stated. I think the gist of it is really an incentive for using fossil fuels. One incentive is a disincentive. I think this resolution is asking us to put on hat in the ring and say, Congress, please look at this. Try to develop something. So I sent out an email today with some suggested modifications, and I would make a motion to approve the resolution with those modifications.
Motion made by Michael Fiocco.
I second that.
Seconded by John Bonnet. Further discussion, or are we ready to vote? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Our second item under old business is the review of the preliminary subdivision plat for Vine and Wendover. Victoria Bailiff from the Planning Department will lead us in this discussion.
Thank you. We have subdivision 2017-03. Chatham Park investors have submitted a preliminary plat for review. The site is zoned PDD and is located off of Thompson Street between Pittsburgh Fire Tower Road and Chatham Parkway. The proposal is to subdivide 181.9 acres into 4 tracts. One of the tracts, consisting of 12.82 acres, has been designated for the public right-of-way. The 3 other will later be further divided to accommodate residential development. A portion of the land has already been annexed, and the developer is applying for annexation of the remaining area. These plans have been reviewed in accordance with the town's applicable development ordinances by the appropriate departments, and staff is recommending approval of the preliminary plat. The planning board reviewed these plans at their meeting on November 6th, and in a vote of 6-0 recommended approval of the plat. It was brought to my attention that there is a question about the tree coverage area sheet, and it states on there that the minimum preserved TCA should be 11%, and the minimum required TCA is 21%, which it is correct as it's written there. Minimum preserved TCA is existing tree coverage area, but you can also have restored TCA, and that combined would be your required TCA, the 21%. So the preserved TCA should be less than the required. I hope I haven't confused you. Are there any further questions?
Could you repeat that?
Okay, so the minimum required TCA is total over everything. But you can have two different types of TCA. You can have the preserve, which is what's already there, existing, that they're not touching. And then you can also have restored TCA. That's what may be existing, but it's not sufficient to meet TCA requirements. So the developer adds in a few trees here and there, what they're supposed to, and you set up to meet the requirements. So you can have two different types, but together they should equal 21%, the required TCA.
I would say, don't get too used to that, because the tree protection section element is changed, has been proposed to change from this. This is what we were going with because that was in review at the time. But that's why that element is taking a little time to get back in front of you, because we're going through that.
Right, and that's why I would question the use of the word required. Now, there is no element presently that's regulatory.
I think Chatham Park's trying to meet the element as drafted once those plans come into review. And there's a cutoff time where if elements change, as this one has, we're not going back to try to figure out if they're meeting the current draft.
Right. And so even if this plan were approved as such and the element had a higher requirement, it would not create a non-conformity.
It would not. That's right.
Are there further questions? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Michael Fiocco.
Second.
Seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. The annexation provision petition is next on our agenda. This is the proposed annexation of Wendover Parkway.
Okay. This is annexation 2017-09. Chatham Park investors have proposed the annexation of 116.93 acres located east of Pittsburgh Fire Tower Road, west of Chatham Parkway, and north of Thompson Street. The parcel is zoned PDD and is currently vacant. This is a portion of the subdivision that you just saw. A public hearing was held on November 27th. There were no citizens who chose to speak at this hearing.
Questions for Victoria?
Motion to approve.
Second. Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. The next is the Mosaic Partners rezoning on 15501, right near Russet Road.
Yes.
Little triangle there, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Rezoning 2017-05. Eco Partners is proposing to rezone approximately 0.45 acres located along the eastern side of US 15501, just north of Russet Run intersection, from RA2 residential agriculture to C2 highway commercial. This parcel has been zoned RA2 since the late 1980s. The future land use plan has designated this property for commercial. The surrounding properties are zoned PDD to the south and to the east. To the north, there are properties zoned C2 and RA2, while to the west, properties are zoned RA2 and RA5. Staff finds that the proposed amendment is consistent with the future land use plan and that this parcel presents a suitable location for highway commercial, given that this parcel is located along a major highway and is located near other properties that are currently used as commercial. For these reasons, staff is recommending approval of the rezoning request. A public hearing was held on November 17th. One citizen expressed concerns that this rezoning might result in additional driveways along this portion of US 15501. The Planning Board considered this rezoning at their meeting on December 4th. The board found that the request was consistent with the future land use plan and in a vote of 6-0 recommended to approve.
Questions for Victoria? Is this close to the second entrance to the high school that's going to be on the left-hand side?
Yes, it's a little bit further north.
Okay.
The high school entrance is going to be right there.
Questions or a motion?
Motion to approve.
Move to do the consistent statement.
Motion to approve the consistency statement by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Any further questions? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. We need then a motion with respect to the annexation itself. Oh, excuse me, rezoning. The motion to rezone by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. That brings us to our discussion of additional elements. Jeff Jones has indicated in his cover memo that we will be looking tonight at general provisions, definitions, and landscaping. And that tree protection and stormwater will come back to us in January.
Yes, ma'am.
And that other additional elements are being worked upon, reflected by your department and Sheldon Park.
Yes. So tonight, what we're going to do is have you all give some final comments and hopefully be at a point that these two elements, general provisions and definitions and landscaping, is to a point that it's been drafted and edited by Chatham Park to the point where you all are ready to move forward. Staff is meeting with Chatham Park and internally on the remaining two elements from the second set, which is tree protection and stormwater. Kind of talked a little bit about tree protection earlier. Fred and I had a great meeting with Chatham Park on stormwater last week that will result in some changes to the manual and to the element a little bit. So that's in works, so that'll come back to you in January. The other third set of elements, I do want to report that the Plan Board did start taking those on at their meeting last week, and we'll hear those remaining elements at their January meeting, and then most likely outside of the affordable housing one, be ready to make some recommendations to you all to move forward with those remaining elements. But yes, tonight we have before you the latest draft of the general provisions and definitions and landscaping. Landscaping element we'll take on first. That included a summary page that was compiled by Chatham Park themselves to summarize the significant revisions to the draft, to the May 31st draft, to those edits that were proposed in early November. Staff has read through the summary and the edits and all the comments that were received, and we're comfortable making a recommendation to you all to move forward. It appears the comments that Chatham Park has received to date, they've addressed, and I think they've taken a good shot at that. Any questions on landscaping? And Chatham Park, of course, is here to answer anything.
Jeff, I have one.
Go ahead.
Page 6, where it's regarding the owners of adjacent lots.
Yeah.
Just want to put, I mean, I read it several times and I understand that it's an agreement between two, I guess that's residents.
Two property owners.
Together, and that, is this going to be extended work for the dam? Buffer?
I think what we would do is there would be one more step of knowing that there's been a legal agreement to keep that buffer on the adjacent piece of property. We would have to track that somehow to know that any future development on that piece of property does not take out that buffer, and or monitor it if we have calls that somebody's cutting trees on that adjacent piece of property. So much like if it was a buffer on Chatham Park's property, we would still have to monitor to make sure that trees are being kept. The one step that we're going to have to add in there is just when a property comes up for development that's utilizing this adjacent provision, we're just going to have to note that somewhere in our documents that, hey, you can't take 20 feet from here because that's already being used for Chatham Park.
The agreement is required to be recorded.
Yes.
And
hopefully anybody doing development is going to be doing due diligence to find that, and it'll be, you know, in our records as well.
Right. So that recorded agreement could be in the files.
Yes.
Associated with these parcels, that we have a system that would trigger, hey, you can look at the agreement, which hopefully would have an exhibit in it, so you can track it.
I don't think that provision is going to be used more so than just providing for the buffer on Chatham Park's property. I think there's going to be instances where they need to extend the buffer somewhere on an adjacent piece of property, and that'll happen on occasion, but I don't see it extensively happening around Chatham Park. And two parties have to agree to do this too. So.
Well, I'm a little embarrassed that I have several comments. Several that I emailed out.
Okay.
Several that I intended to print and bring with me. Several that I do not have.
Oh, no.
No, I don't have them. So I went through winging it from my notes where I had wording on the comments.
Did you email those to the board and the
No,
applicant?
I didn't.
Okay.
I did to the applicant.
Okay.
We just happen to have those.
Okay. Maybe the applicant can help guide us through those.
I don't have a clean version of it because it was written all over it, but we can go through them and address them.
If y'all would like to take copies of our written little comments,
Yeah.
if you want to have somebody make a copy, is yours as bad as mine?
It's worse. It's probably worse than yours.
I hope I crossed out all the things where I said, what dummy made this comment?
You were looking at my notes.
I think, yeah, those were Ken's, anything.
My handwritten, okay. I guess in the meantime, if you talk about general provisions and definitions while he's making copies. You want to do that?
Or anyone else has any comments on landscape?
Any other questions on landscaping?
I do. I'm trying to look back because I feel certain that I shared this comment in the past, certainly verbally, but I'm not seeing it in my records that I have submitted electronically. But discussions about definition of high-quality topsoil. Any recollection of that, Chuck?
I haven't seen anything from you on that.
I know that's a topic that you brought up in the past. I'm not sure if that's a comment, but certainly do a definition of that. I think there was some encouragement from you to have them consider that as an alternative.
Well, I think it's a pretty important concept that you've got in here in a couple of places, and I think that it does need to be defined. It's a really important part of your requirements for tree plantings and certain other landscape plantings. And if we want to see those things succeed and grow, and we'd like to see replacement trees in particular grow quickly. Not too quick, for they're brittle and not healthy, but I think that would be very helpful to have in your definitions.
I know we put details on there that call for topsoil as part of tree planting. I'm not sure that I see these as high quality, because I don't know if that's
Page 27.
Oh, that's talking about when we go into urban situations where, well, an example is where you planted trees down in front of our office, but along the street, and it's in a median that might be 13 feet deep by 7. So you basically got 100 square feet of root zone. First of all, this is getting at the fact that it needs much more area than that. So we tried to address the amount of not only area but volume as well, because that's not enough. That's why those trees will not grow but to a certain size. So we tried to put in standards that get into that, and then we can put some kind of, if you're looking for a definition, we can say something more than that, because this is much getting into structural as it is the quality of the topsoil too, because of the situations that they're placed in. Some of these situations, they're under the sidewalk, for example, because you won't get that volume unless you're creating a situation that will not be compacted, so the sidewalk is supported in a certain way.
Suspended.
Right.
Yep.
And so you're creating an environment that the roots can grow beyond what they're typically provided in an urban situation. So, yeah, we can be more specific on that.
And also, I wondered why top and soil were separate. I thought that the word topsoil was one word, but
I'm not going to tell you that I know specifically that you're right or wrong. I don't know that.
I'll make sure that on spell check, we'll look at it.
Okay, do you have other comments, Mr. Barnes?
no. Thank you.
The first item is on page 2, section 2, talks about applicability.
We talked about that a long time today.
Yeah.
After getting this, and wanted to make sure we understood exactly what you were getting at, because we kept going in different. I would say, I think he means this, and Ken would say, I think he means this, and so we decided to let you say what you think you mean.
Yeah. So there are exceptions to the buffer requirements in situations where property abuts open space or conservation easement or a utility easement or a body of water. Or that item is on the property and is therefore occupying the space that would otherwise be occupied by the buffer. And so if that body of water, for instance, were 10 feet onto the property, but the buffer requirement was 50 feet, then the 50-foot buffer, that 40 feet would not go away because of the 10-foot body of water. And I think the way it's written, it says, in that case, that buffer would just go away if there was a body of water, even 1 foot onto the property, that the buffer would cease to need to exist. So I don't think it's appropriate, and I wanted to mention that to the extent that that item is on the property, it would not eliminate the total buffer, just a portion of it.
Okay. I'm going to say that this was exactly what we talked about a lot today. And I personally think that, this isn't personally, the intent of where it should go is to make sure that there's a buffer there. Mm-hmm. And so we would not try to let a body of water 10 feet wide or whatever feet wide supplant the need to have a 40-foot landscape buffer along that edge. So we can rewrite or delete or clarify to make sure that that's the case.
But it did seem that would.
I know as we went through, we would go through various. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, and so there's good reasons for some of them, and others is very unclear. So. Okay. Because some of these we're talking about regulated, you've got a regulated buffer sitting there. It's already full of trees and it's already full of that space. And
right.
So, right.
Exactly. And so I didn't think that was inappropriate at all.
Right.
I understood that it would be satisfied that there were those situations where it wouldn't, and everybody be looking around saying, what do we do here? So we'd be more clear about it. Obviously, italicizing something is just a minor comment.
Right, we understood that one.
So, yeah, page 6, item 3, the language talks about modifications to the buffers. And I think those modifications are exclusive to the fact that the property developing adjacent to an existing development then has half the requirement of the buffer, because the property that was developed previously had the requirement to provide the total buffer. So I was asking myself, is that the modification that's being referenced? And as I got into it and went further in, I saw that there were opportunities for reductions of that half buffer by half again.
We'll get into each one of those specifically when we get to that. But related to number 3, our intent, and again, we can work on the wording if that's not what you understand the intent to be. But our intent for that class 7 is that whatever that number is in that chart, you would provide that, whether you were the first on the scene or second.
Right.
And there is no opportunity to have that by putting a fence in there. You can put a fence, but it will not then reduce the width of the buffer to from 50 to 25 or something like that. So with that one, because it was the most intense buffer of everything in that chart, we didn't want to allow reductions in that.
Right. No, it makes.
So that's the intent. I don't know if it came across that way.
No, I got that. I got the exemption or the non-exemption for the type 7 buffer.
Okay.
that would not be a modification of the buffer. So I was looking for other potential modifications of the buffer beyond.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If there were any things in here that give the ability to reduce that buffer or modify that buffer, we're saying that we're going to clean that up so that that one class of buffer stays the way it is.
Talking about the other classes.
Right.
He's talking about 1 through 6.
Yep.
Okay, well, 3 doesn't talk. Yeah, the 3 is just talking about number 7.
Yeah, that particular, but
So
he's
we're
now
on to
talking
that.
about Owen.
Okay.
And he had comments about Owen
Yeah,
later
well,
on, which Chuck will get to.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so I am talking about the 1 through 6. So.
Okay, well, so you want to do that now, or when we get to it in your comments?
Well, I think, okay, so later on in my comments, we're talking about the 1/4, the 1/8.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, yeah, let's go there.
Okay. So I think we, as we went through what we thought your comment was on that, what we decided to do was change the wording so that, okay, first of all, the way we've written this, the first guy to come in has to do the full number.
Yep.
Unless he builds a fence. Then you can go half. Because the fence takes the place of the requirement of a lot of the planting and providing an opaque screen.
A fence, wall, and
Berm, either, any of those. And that's, your proposed ordinance includes that sort of provision as well. So it's not something that's unusual. But then what we said is that after the first guy does that, and again, we're not talking about class 7, that's
right.
Talking about the rest of them. If the first site comes in and provides a fence and cuts it to half, then the second site the provision in here says he can cut it to half, but he can't put a fence up and then cut it to half again.
Okay.
So you only get to put one fence up and use that condition once. So then, with the way the numbers are set up, I think it works out to where you've always got, if the total is a 20 and a 20 against each other, the first site would do 20 or 10 with a fence, and then the second site would do 20 for a total of 30, as opposed to 40.
No, second side would do half.
No, half, so a total of 20. So you'd always have half of the way the numbers work out, you always get half of the
second
site gets half, because that's what the condition is. But he can't go to a fourth.
No reduction.
Right, no reduction. There will be no reductions beyond that.
The other provisions.
Right, that's right. And so we would
The
clean
second
up.
guy
Does that
put
say
up.
that in here now?
No, we have to change it.
No, you were
Yes.
drawing, I think, appropriate conclusions that you could get to that, and so we agreed that wasn't the intent. So we would put something in there that prevented that from happening.
Now, the second lot still could put up a fence or berm,
But
but not get a reduction, not further reduction for that.
And I think when we took that to the next logical provision, when we talked about averaging, we could take it down to another half. I got down to an eighth of the buffer.
Well, I'm not sure you can ever. We could probably spend a lot of time talking about whether you can get to an eighth, but we're not. We're going to clean those things up. So if you could, you can't. But
I mean, I embrace the averaging. I do.
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to not be so rigid and to let creativity happen. And when parcels have certain demands on them, to allow that flexibility. So I like it a lot. But the idea that you could go half, now I'm at an eighth of a buffer, I'm like, well, that's silly. Let's not do that.
We agree with that.
Okay. Okay, I guess I'm back up to my item on page 6, number 3. And I'm requesting that we add an item that describes the perimeter buffer transition requirements for parcels to be developed with land uses by SUP only in the town's ordinance, because that was a very special.
We understood that, and we've made that change.
And on the previous one, you get number 2, but that's correct. It should be referring to
Development plan.
Development plan.
Okay.
In those 2 places where it said development agreement, it should say plan.
Okay, not buffer agreement?
No, it's really development plan.
Okay.
Yes.
Page 7, perimeter buffer transitions, I'm suggesting that the language, the verbiage that has a dissimilar land use class is unnecessary as a qualifier, because I think the buffer is required or applied to properties that have a similar use class.
I think we got this.
We're going to take care of that.
Yeah, we're going to take it. We understand. Well,
Okay.
he understands it. I don't. That's why I have a question mark in my mind.
The master plan does say dissimilar, but we're going to change that.
Okay.
We're not going to change the master plan.
We're not-
We can't change the master plan.
No.
We're going to correct the language.
We're going to.
Maybe the master plan envisioned that similar uses didn't have any buffers.
It
It did. Okay.
But the master plan also doesn't require any buffers within Chattel Park.
Right.
But we're just imposing those
Yes.
on ourselves.
Yeah, I was suggesting that berms be a minimum 3-to-1, so I appreciate that I should be using the word maximum.
Well, I think that's what I think we both are understanding.
Right.
But we also, I think what we talked about too was they're going to be, just so everyone else on the board understands this, a 3-to-1 maximum slope is 3-to-1 is a maximum slope that you could easily mow a berm. Once you start getting steeper than 3-to-1, then you if you're on a riding mower, you're more likely to tip over. It's hard to control a push mower. So you put that sort of standard if you know it's going to have grass on it. If it's going to have other plant material that you don't mow, then you can go steeper. And you take less space to provide the same height berm. So we're not going to put a 3-to-1 max on it. We're saying 3-to-1 max if it's grass, if it's got grass on it, or 2-to-1 if it's got other plant material.
Well, 2-to-1 can be pretty tough to stabilize and keep stabilized.
No, you have to.
Become an erosive
It's
problem.
something you got to take care of, but you can do it. And a lot of what's going on there is when you planted those plants, the root mass of all those. I mean, you can't just put to do that. You can't just sporadically put a shrub here and there. It's got to fill the berm.
Yeah, I was suggesting that the finished side of the fence.
We agree with that. We had on page 21, I believe, that talks about talking about putting the finished side of the fence towards the right of way, but we didn't address it appropriately for the lot or for the adjacent lot, so we've got that written up to fix that.
This next one on page 11, 12, item 3, I'm asking the question. Well, what I'm perceiving is that the site plan doesn't have to identify that the existing vegetation satisfies the buffer standards, which I think is wholly doable at that level. And this is suggesting that the planning director is going to come out when a CO is requested and analyze it to say whether or not that meets the buffer requirement. Seems to me we can have that on the plan so the planning director can go out and go, yes, that's what they said was going to be there, that's what's there, instead of saying, no. All right.
Yeah, usually and this, I think it's fairly standard in different municipalities. As you said, when you're going through a plan approval, you don't necessarily have that exact line of what is left in existing vegetation after you clear it for a number of reasons. Because there could be gaps in the vegetation that far into the site without knowing it until you clear it. So typically what you put on the planting plan is a buffer restoration detail that talks about how you're going to fill in those gaps should they occur. And then when you get out to having site inspections to make sure that whether it's the planning director or a zoning compliance officer or somebody like that, you're doing some sort of inspection of the site to make sure that all the plant material was planted. Everything that you said was going to be on the site plan has been done, has been achieved before you can provide a CO. And so the same thing along that buffer, you see, and sometimes it'll happen that there could have been a gap or a hole that doesn't meet his definition of what should be occurring along the edge, and he would say, add a tree or add something here to finish that off. And so it takes a visual inspection at the end of the process, but this is what we're talking about here. And it's usually the planning director or someone that he is on his staff that is doing that.
But the plan would identify the requirement and what existing
And that's
vegetation is anticipated.
right. It's with that detail. It's saying that if this occurs, then we will treat it in this way.
So that the planning director, when they go out to the site, they're not being subjective.
Right. They're just saying, here, you need to finish what you showed on this detail.
Right. So here's the problem zone. This is how you should have treated it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Is that the way you
Yes. I mean, I don't think we want. I'm sure that Jeff doesn't want to do it. And I don't think the development community wants Jeff to do it. To walk out there and go, whatever.
We would have a typical replant encounter, a typical buffer detail if the current plants, the existing plants or trees are removed or is not sufficient for that buffer. I would always want a typical detail.
Okay. So there is the exemption for section 7.1 and village centers for the buffers.
Not all buffers.
So not streetscape?
Not streetscape. I think it gets into landscape buffering, this is the situation, but streetscape is not mentioned in that section. And we went after, again, Ken actually, he understood where you're going, and he said, let's go back and look at that. And I guess, I think it's section 2. Yeah, because it says perimeter buffers and boundary transitions is where that language applies.
Right.
So, and when you look at the streetscapes, they're not going to be running down the middle of a village center because that's supporting those roads that those streetscape buffers are assigned to are 4-lane roadways, larger roadways as defined in the complete streets guidelines and your thoroughfare plan.
Yeah, I think your reference was to thoroughfare plans, so we're talking about boulevards, freeways.
Right. So it goes along the edges of village centers, and there could be a situation, but it's not trying to put those kind of planting standards along an urban street front, as we didn't do along Bingham Place.
Right, and I'm thinking of that,
right.
Pushing the building, making it an urban feel, so that would still have a streetscape buffer requirement or not, because that road is 4 lanes with a median.
But it's not defined on your thoroughfare plan by those terms that are listed in the in the wording in the element.
I'll look into that. Okay.
And particularly when the town takes it over.
There was use of the word urban environment, and I don't see that I can look somewhere to find out what that means.
Well, we got on page 30, we get further into what's happening in that situation, and it gets back to some of the things I was talking about with Mr. Bonnes earlier with topsoil. But we are going to add a sentence or two that gets into what the areas that applies to.
Okay. I do not have a page 30 in mind.
When I wrote page 30, I think I was looking at the edited version. It's the
okay, gotcha.
The red line version. But it is on page 26 of the down at the bottom, tree plantings in urban environments. But it still did not provide a definition, and so we're doing that.
I was harping on the electric fence again. It's being prohibited.
Yeah,
that's right.
I know a lot of.
We don't intend to have, in our table of permitted uses, we don't have livestock breeding and those kind of things that's allowed at all. So the only thing that we could come up against is if somebody wanted to buy larger parcels and have horses.
That's exactly right, and those folks are definitely going to want to use electric fence. Not all of them, but probably a lot of them.
And if they can afford the amount of land that they would want and the value of that land, they can afford to pay for an electric fence. But We aren't thinking that that's ever going to occur, so that's why we didn't include it.
Well, I think folks will look at the electric fence as a cheaper option.
Oh, I don't. I think the price of the land is going to be something that somebody could do that, but we don't envision that being part of our land plan.
This is going to be in a rural setting, so to speak, with a large parcel. And they're going to carve out pastures and fencing, but they're going to want use.
If they've got that size of a piece of property. But as I said, right now, we aren't planning on turning in subdivisions that have that size piece of property. If you're telling me to do it, we will do it.
Well, I think it would be nice for that to be an option. One of the
Okay, we will do it.
that is associated with equestrians is you've got the mink and manure crowd. Both of them love horses.
You want us to use that terminology in the element?
Yeah.
If somebody is building a development like this, like Chuck said, the cost of the land, so I don't see, why they couldn't put up a boarded fence and not have electric. I think that's a pretty cheap way out and not look very well.
Yeah, they'll probably be looking for a certain look with that, won't they?
Yeah. We do allow in the element the underground invisible fence.
Right.
It's more just something because of being, again, in a neighborhood that is a little more dangerous for kids. So that's the only reason we did it. If you want us to include it, we will include it.
I think it'd be good to have, well, yeah, not to exclude its ability to use it, but leave it up to a personal choice. Now my note is a little cryptic here where I'm just saying, made further above transitions to be produced without these requirements.
Well, we're trying to, here's one of those, maybe we can anticipate what you meant, but we felt like with the earlier conversations we've had that got into where we would not be reducing anything less than half of what the requirement is in certain those situations, that would take care of this, because we can't go beyond to a quarter or something like that. And I guess if you find that to be something different from what you were talking about, you
I'll look back at that. I see my item B is also kind of cryptic to me at this moment. So.
Yeah, you'd have to tell us where they were in competition, because we weren't sure that we knew what that was.
Okay. My next item, page 23, section 9. About retaining walls and stormwater devices. There was a proposal on Penguin Place where the wall was to be concrete and have penguins cast into that wall. My recollection was that was an acceptable wall treatment from a public art perspective in Chapel Park. And I think the additional element right now says you can't do that.
Well, what we have said is we've seen too many situations where a cast-in-place concrete wall was something that was not acceptable. Now, that was the way that started in Penguin Place. It ultimately became something that became, let's put penguins on it, and then that turned it into something that was acceptable. But we just don't want to allow it as a standard material cast-in-place concrete walls, because they don't look as nice.
Yeah. So is that something that Chatham Park would entertain if it were some...
If there's some way to include some sort of treatment that took it beyond the standard concrete look.
And so then Chatham Park would find it acceptable, and then Jeff would get it and say, you can't do a concrete wall. This element says...
Well, unless we put some kind of wording in here, that's right.
I think it would be, because that's a pretty neat idea. I wish it had been pulled off. So I just saw this as an unnecessary prohibition and something that could be controlled and still produce a really high quality product. I understand what you're saying. I mean, you don't want to put up cinder block walls that look horrible. So I get it. But I think there's some really creative things that can be done with concrete.
We'll have to work on that.
Okay.
Okay. Have it go to your art committee.
Well, we can.
We can.
We'll get something written that,
Right.
that Mr. Eagle can live with.
That allows Jeff to say yes.
This is sort of our, oh yeah, we can do this, this is me, we can, and then he's over there making sure that all you attorneys are happy with the way it's worded so that it does what it's trying to do rather than too much or too little.
My next one was, I know you're going to be able to tell me exactly what that means, but I think it means.
Yeah, this goes back to
this high quality topsoil.
Goes
Yeah.
back into that conversation. Let me get to it. Again, this is a more urban solution when you're having a difficult time providing volume of soil. And so particularly when you've got situations where you've got sidewalks or drives or something like that, and you're trying to get roots beyond that, you will put these root paths, and typically it's a PVC pipe.
Okay.
And you'll have say a 6-inch PVC pipe that you've got topsoil in, and the roots are making its way through that to get over then beyond the drive into the open area where there's more room for root growth. So you're just giving it a path. A lot of times you'll see in sidewalks where the joint there's water getting between the curb and the sidewalk joint, and so you'll see roots growing. They're making their way down that joint because that's where roots are getting water. So this is another way of just providing those paths for roots to grow in urban situations.
Okay. Is that perforated?
The situations I've seen, it was not, because
you're getting the root.
you don't want roots going up that way. You want to keep it within the pipe. So. But that's the sort of thing that they do research and it changes, and I wouldn't want to specify one way or the other and then eliminate the possibility of one or the other.
Then I think section 11.
Yeah, we agree with that. You understand we're just trying to make sure that there's not some mandate to have to plant in the wrong time of year. We want to be able to plant when things are most likely to survive. So if you're saying the town requirement is to put a bond just to ensure that's going to happen.
That's it.
Jeff's going to send some language for us.
Okay.
All right. Incorporate it.
That's what I think. Thanks. We need printing the email.
Are there further questions? Then I gather this particular element needs some continuing tuning and.
Well, I'm assuming that if we put in writing what we just said we were, that would take care of it. Is that right?
Are there any further questions or additions for Chuck Smith to incorporate in this next review? Hearing none. Are we into definitions and general provisions?
Be happy to try to answer any questions.
Questions for Ken Eagle?
I got one, Ken, page 4. Okay. Section 1, it says any element may be amended in the same manner as amended to the text of the township for zoning ordinance. I think I spoke several times ago about some type of wording in here regarding some type of revisit or revision, any element that the town and a park can agree on can come back at a reasonable time and review.
I can try to come up with something that you'd be short of having to go through the entire process like
Right.
you would
I
for
mean,
zoning
yes,
amendment.
because it's like Fred and I were talking one day at lunch, and with stormwater, you have so much changes in technology and all like this, but I just feel like it's that we should have some type of amendment in the provisions that if there's another element, whether it be tree coverage or signage or lighting, you know how lighting changes also the technology, that we cannot go back and change in an X amount of time to revisit that one element regarding that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I need to look at the master plan and see if it would prohibit us from doing that. It's kind of built into the stormwater element, the way that was written with the manual, which really addresses all those technical things that you're talking about, being an exhibit to the actual element and provisions that, as the town engineer and the Chatham Park Stormwater Administrator agree, you know, those things can be modified because of the very reason you said, technical, and things change, and there may be new stormwater devices 5 years from now that we haven't even thought of at this point in time, and the state may revise its manual, and the town may revise its, and so that's kind of built into that one. But short of the master plan prohibiting us from doing that, I'm happy to try to come up with some wording that allows that to happen.
My memory is that when we talked about this before, like it was, both sides agreed that something needed to be done, and it was not a requirement, but it was something if the board and Chatham Park both agreed needed to be changed, that it could be.
Yes, I understand that. Yeah. So, again, I just need to reread that provision, the section in the master plan to make sure, and I think the town adopted some kind of ordinance to deal with the additional elements or resolution. We have to look at that too and see what it says about process. But if we can do that, then that's fine to do that. Or if it takes you redoing your resolution, then you may need to do that. I just don't recall what it says, but I think there was a process adopted for. I may be thinking of the small area plan instead of this, but I just have to research that.
I don't recall anything.
I may be thinking of small area plan.
I'm just saying, I just feel like down the road, whether it be this board or anybody with Chatham Park or whoever, I just feel like it should, if it's something regarding the town and Chatham Park agree on, that something should be revisited, revised to agreement with both parties.
Again, I don't disagree with
the element says, what this says now?
Yeah, I think the element says that it will be done in the same manner that.
It's an amendment to the zoning ordinance, yes.
And so.
That would be applicant proposing a change.
Or even
public
the town.
hearing and all that stuff.
The town can initiate an amendment, because these amendments, either initiated by the applicant or the town, will not go forward unless they're agreed upon. So I think there's a mechanism in here.
It just has to be done like a zoning case, the way it's written out. If you want it differently from that, we can, again, assuming we're
sometimes you can sit down and read things one day, and it's like Jeff just said, it may be here, but it doesn't seem like it's here to me now. That's what I'm trying to say. You can read things one way, and it sounds okay. The next day, you may really have a different solution to it.
I think at one time there was a desire by maybe the additional committee, additional element committee, plan board, this board, was to be able to make changes or propose changes to the element outside of Chatham Park, blessing that. But at some point, Chatham Park is going to have to say, okay.
I remember, it seems that there was a recommendation that the board in Chatham Park revisit things periodically.
Yeah, periodically.
Right, and say, how is this working? Is this working the way we intended?
So I think one, you get to see how things are progressing as they build out and as plans come before you. And if we don't like something and how it's being built on the landscape, that's when we'll definitely have comments from you or future board members. And we will have to note that. I don't have this belief that once these are all complete and approved, that our work with Chatham Park is going to be done, and we're not going to continue our bi-weekly meetings. Those will be ongoing because there'll always be something going on. So there's I have the belief that there's going to be communication between the town and Chatham Park, or future developers in Chatham Park. So I think that I could be wrong. Many years down the line, there could be less communication. But I believe that we're going to have that communication. If there's changes that I want, or you all want, or Fred wants, we're going to be able to communicate that to Chatham Park. And Chatham Park's going to listen to us. And they may see that, yes, that needs to change. And that'll be where we have to work sort of outside of a public hearing, or we'll work here to bring you all amendments whenever we see that they need to happen. What I have recalled is there be a desire that, you know, if we changed our lighting element, our lighting ordinance, and we wanted Chatham Park to follow that lighting ordinance, that one little piece that we like, we'd have to have them to agree to that change. If their lighting element already agreed to that aspect of development. And that's where I think some board members, not only here, but committee members, planning members, have a little discomfort of the process, that we don't necessarily get to tell Chatham Park, we don't like that. We as a town are going to change it regardless of what you want. We have to have some cooperation from the applicant to do that. So, but I think from just an applicant or a town initiated amendment, I think the process is already there, where we would do it much like a rezoning or a text amendment to our current ordinance.
Well, the master plan does provide exactly that with respect to review and approval of additional elements. Now, Bessie can weigh in on this too, but that could be interpreted as the initial review and approval if the board wanted to come up with a different procedure for amendment, but the master plan does say the process for review and approval of additional elements shall be the same as the legislative process described in the town of Pittsburgh zoning ordinance for an amendment to the text of the ordinance. So that's why that was repeated in there, because it was in the master plan. So you have to give us your guidance on how you would want to do that if you want to change it from that.
I think the language makes sense. Lots of public hearing, let the public be informed.
That must be initiated by an agreement party. I don't want it to end up being something that's adversarial.
Sure. I mean, we could all discuss it ahead of time and then just propose an amendment to a particular element or elements and then go through the process. That's certainly.
I've already suggested some.
We've got a few ourselves, so.
So there's a list.
Yeah.
That
we're developing. It's kind of a work in progress.
Yeah, and I think there will be a day that we will revisit the sign element or the lighting element because we're now applying it and we're coming into things that.
Sure.
Oh, why did we do that? Or why does Chatham Park not allow for that? It's a list that we're running and we're keeping, and I think that we'll come together and have an agreement. Once you all may want to say, I don't know where this is, sort of time frame, in the developer agreement or something that says, in 5 years, we're going to compel you to come back with this list from staff and the applicant. Tell us what that list is, and let's act on it. Y'all might want to do something like that, and they may agree with something like that, because, yeah, they have a list and we have a list. So, in 5 years may be too long.
Why wouldn't that be in general provisions? Where the additional elements, periodic revisit.
It could be any or both. I'm not sure that this general provision, we're weighting it like an element, but.
Yeah, it's just a little framework.
Right.
Yeah.
Developer agreement is certainly going to weigh more than general provisions.
But the general provisions apply to all of the elements.
Yes.
It's easier to do it in one than have to do it in all the others. But I think you have done it in all the others that have been approved anyway, so it's sort of, it's a moot point. Right, in each resolution that you've adopted, it provides for the amendment process that's set forth in the general provisions, which you haven't done yet, and also in the master plan, and it also gives you the right to do it unilaterally if state law changes or exigent circumstances that are needed to protect the public health and safety could justify it as well. So you've already got opportunities built in, but if you want the periodic, regardless of changes or desires, then that's not in here. So there is no provision for periodic or regular periodic change or review. So if that's what you want, then we need to talk about it.
Would you prefer that be in a development agreement?
No, the development agreement may have some kind of review provisions as well. But if you want in the elements, then you need to probably say it and put it in there.
Yeah, the development agreement by the statute, by North Carolina statute, has some review requirements with respect to the development agreement. But if it's the pleasure of the board, we can certainly add something in here that deals with that. But as far as, if we can go back to Commissioner Farrell and Commissioner Foley's point, I'm not sure we have the ability to do that at this point in time because of the way that the master plan is written.
We've made changes to the master plan where it's necessary in the elements.
Yeah. If you have thoughts on that, we can
think about that.
Well, I remember the discussion that was out at the Chatham Park office that we discussed this periodic sit down, and I liked the flavor of it because it wasn't adversarial. It was gee, is this whole thing really still working for us, and how do we tweak it together?
And that's fine with us to do that. Just, the question would be, what time period are we talking about? What's everybody comfortable?
There are consequences to changes, though, and
that's right.
On either side. So you need to be aware of those. So
as far as just reviewing it and talking about what we need to do, I mean, that's
not necessarily making a change. It could be that
we decide we don't need to make a change.
They may propose things that we don't want to change, and vice versa. But it could be that this periodic review, whatever the time frame is, it's just like a coming together, and we're going to go through our list, and they're going to go through their list, and we'll talk about it.
And we're already doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, we meet bi-weekly with the staff, and so we're really kind of doing that on an ongoing basis. But in terms of bringing it to the board and talking about it, then that would have to be a little different matter.
Yeah.
And we can certainly do that.
And certainly, as we start applying these elements, we've got 5 now. We're learning more, and we'll learn more as these elements are approved. So I'm thinking you don't want the window of review to be too short because we won't have a lot of information to share back with you. So you want to have a time frame that's reasonable for us to make sure that we can apply all these things that
could be as requested by the board from time to time. We'll do that. I mean, you're not going to want to do it, but so much. It takes a lot of your time. So.
It could even just be on a basis if an issue comes up.
Well, I think that's always
something
that we
can consider anyway.
But this list that staff keeps and that town clerk keeps, we should have a discussion about it. Because right now I'm throwing out, hey, why don't you go make this change? And I understand from their standpoint they don't want to make that change. And it would be something that I would support, and I think you all would support too, some signage issue. But I understand they don't want to make a change right now. We're in the throes of getting other elements approved, and we don't want to come back with an amendment to the sign element to deal with one little aspect of it.
Well, sometimes conversations make way for negotiations. Like, okay, we'll do this. I don't know, that opens up that whole thing.
Well, that's where their list and our list could work out, where we propose things that we want them to change, they propose things that they want to change, and we come to some sort of negotiation. Well, we'll give you this. We can live with that if you agree to amend something that we want.
It's like doing a punch list on a new house. You know, you come together to do the things, and then I think what the board is saying is that they don't ever want to be in a position of saying, okay, that's done, we're finished, because that's never going to happen. Well, for one thing, we'll be dead.
That's precisely it. And I think the periodic review, that is definitely an ideal solution, because things change so quickly.
Yeah.
And something that we say we want now may be obsolete, who knows, in 2 years, or may be a better way in 2 years. So I like the periodic review.
Right. How many years do you think would be optimal?
Well, we're so new at this, I would say annual.
Annual?
Yeah, for right now, so we can make sure that everything.
I was going to say 5. But annual, I mean, it could be annual, and we could.
This relationship.
I mean, it doesn't mean that it's a big summit every time. It may be that, hey, we got together, everything's working well, a couple of items, let's work on those. Might otherwise be 5 or 6 heavy lifting items.
Why don't we put in here that we'll have an annual review with the board, or a review on such other longer period of time as the board determines from time to time, or something to kind of cover, giving you the flexibility. If it looks like an annual review is not needed, it could be a year after. It could be, in that way, there's, you've got the.
We can check in annually if
yes.
we want to meet.
And if we need to, or you think, everybody thinks everything doesn't need to be reviewed, that's fine. So I can write that into here, and then on what the two of you said, and Mr. Messick and I can talk about that a little bit, if there's a way to accommodate that and stay within the bounds of what we're bound to by the master plan and any other thing the board's already adopted, then we try to put something in to deal with that too. All right.
Isn't that the kind of thing that maybe want to be timed with staff and board retreat? Because sometimes a retreat would be a good chance to discuss the issues that we have, and then after that would be a good time to do the meeting.
Well, the board can set the time for us.
Exactly. I just thought of
Yeah.
that.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
I didn't think it'd be yours.
No, actually.
I appreciate your support, but I really wasn't looking for anything annual. I think I didn't want to give every year.
The identifiable.
I'm sorry.
The crux of Mr. Messick told me that he was
Did Jay Farrell
We'll have it at a different location.
probably wrong.
Yeah.
You were really thinking quarterly, weren't you, Commissioner?
I'd like to better understand the specifics on the Development Review Committee, and that it be the exclusive agency authorized to interact with the town. Does that mean that the DRC is the only entity that can submit development applications? Or
that's kind of a work in progress too, I believe. And this goes back to a master plan requirement. The concern back when the master plan was being approved, I believe, was that there could come a time when there were so many different developments going on or being proposed that it would get burdensome on the planning staff to have to deal with too many people at one time. And that if things were channeled through, and we just happened to pick a name, the Development Review Committee, but if things were channeled through this committee to kind of be in between all the other proposed developers and the planning staff, that would possibly facilitate things and make it not as burdensome on the planning staff. And that's really I believe that my recollection is that's what the intent of that was, and it was to just make things a little easier.
So in practice, we won't, if the developer wants to meet with us regarding Chatham Park property, we won't have that meeting initially unless Chatham Park is present in that meeting. And we won't accept plans for review unless we have Chatham Park DRC sign.
And one thing, Commissioner Bonnet, that we try to do with the Development Review Committee, and Chuck and Robbie and right now are the primary ones, and because they're so familiar with what the requirements are and have helped work on the elements that we try to kind of head off at the pass, if you will, things that we know will not be acceptable, and get the plans in a better shape before they get to the town, and the staff doesn't have to spend time weeding out things that they shouldn't have to deal with, just to straighten it out. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think
one of the things that will help me once the plans start rolling in, there's a number of elements that allow for alternate compliance or a planning director decision on something else. The DRC is going to be communicating those types of alternate compliances. So I'm aware of those coming in, so I can just know, so I don't have to look for them. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to approve it. It's to say, look, they need a different landscaping along the street. It's something to think about. We have a number of developer staff meetings leading up to submittal, and then after the submittal and after the first set of comments. So we can all come together. Chatham Parks usually has a representative there, even if it's not their project. And everybody's on the same page. And we're sort of working through this together. I think if one read it literally, it could be that we could only deal with Chatham Park, but I think that would be burdensome from us, because I want to talk to these applicants. I want to see them. I want to understand their project. I don't want to have to hear it secondhand necessarily. That's how I want to operate. So, and I know that's how Victoria would want to stand up before you all and say, yes, this plan is meeting our ordinances and Chatham Park. I don't want to have to do that second, third hand. So this idea of the DRC is only interacting with them, while it's good, I think we just need to modify that a little bit, and I think it's working okay right now.
Well, I guess that makes perfect sense to me, and it sounds very, very sensible. I just would like some assurance from Mr. Messick that this wouldn't in any way constrain third parties, fourth parties, other individuals, companies, property owners association from interacting with town with respect to
Well, sure, it's going to constrain them. I mean, that's what it's intended to. Just like Jeff said, I mean, he's getting a consistent perspective from the DRC, which he finds to be helpful. And because otherwise, you would have every applicant who's tried to make a deal with Chatham Park to buy this park or that park or do this or do that. I mean, they're all going to have different engineers, they're going to have different developers or different landscapers, and he would be inundated with lots of different, consultants who are trying to deal with one particular issue. So the benefit for the DRC is that it gets filtered, or at least has to go through the DRC, and at least it's able to be channeled in a more coherent fashion that Jeff can appreciate. But yeah, it'll constrain individuals, for sure.
So are we seeking to constrain the opinions of unaffiliated parties, or of neighbors of a development application?
I don't think it's got anything to do with the neighbors.
Well, this is my concern. I understand now the relationship proposed between Chatham Park investors, the DRC, and any developers that are parties or assignees with Chatham Park investors. My concern is the public, or a property owners association in the future that isn't under control of Chatham Park, or a neighborhood association, or just a citizen who has complaint concern with respect to a development application that they're not backing.
They would not have to go through the development review committee. This is for people submitting development plans or wanting to submit development plans, proposed development plans. So someone that had a complaint about something, that doesn't constrain them.
And they would be considered, the public, and they, to the extent that you have a public hearing, or to the extent that you have the planning board, or any other input kind of process in place, they would certainly be, invited and welcome to come speak to that issue. To the extent that the town staff has the time to entertain comments or questions from the public, then I'm sure they'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, I've never envisioned that not occurring.
Doesn't constrain that.
No.
Thank you. Sure. For that reassurance.
Okay, so I have two things that I'm taking away from this so far. One is to get some language in here about an annual review or such other longer time as the board determines from time to time. Not lesser time, but longer time. And the other is to see if there's some way short of, if that's what the board wants to do, some way short of a full-blown zoning kind of case process.
I don't want nothing like that. I just want some assurance that, that the two groups, I guess you can say, just hash out a difference.
Well, maybe the annual review would take care of that, Commissioner Farrell. I think if we get a chance of that. Or longer. Of course, the board has, questions or concerns at any time. We're usually here, so at board meetings, so we can try to address those as they come up.
And really, it's been my experience, and Jeff weigh in, that if there's a text amendment to be had, it's usually in concert between the applicant and the planning staff working together to get the language correct.
Yeah. It's pretty rare in my career that I've had one propose a text amendment that staff did not back at the end of the day. And we may have went back on some iterations, but at the end of the day, it's okay.
And the process is not that burdensome. We have a public hearing, and we talk about it. Okay.
Right, so we'll look forward to them having those tweets in January when
We'll get both of these back to you fairly quickly, I hope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to old business, our last item, which is the wastewater capacity. Do you want to introduce this?
Yes, ma'am. I believe you had in your agenda package a draft of the agreement between Chatham Park investors and the town. It is substantially similar to the one you saw at your last meeting, with some changes that had been suggested, recommended, or as a result of comments from Mr. Fiocco. Since then, he's had more comments, questions, and issues, and there have been another revision of that as well, which relates to the issue of Chatham Park investors agreeing to pay a portion of the cost of the Sanford improvements, not just the indebtedness to the state revolving fund loan account. So the text on pages 2 and 3 has been changed to say that basically the Chatham Park investors would agree to pay 62.5% of the cost of the Sanford improvements, which would include the cost of the indebtedness to the state revolving fund loan. I believe the concern was that there may be some costs that are not covered by the loan. I don't think Mr. Fiocco is a doomsayer, but he is anticipating the worst possible consequences, that if this construction contract is overrun for some reason because the allowances for rock or whatever are exceeded, or there's some other reason why there's not sufficient loan funds to pay for all of this, that Chatham Park would step up and pay its proportionate share of whatever that overrun might happen to be. I think Chatham Park is agreeable to that in principle. First thing speaking for himself.
We are. I think I would need to give Mr. Messick, there are probably some global revisions because of the language changing from indebtedness to cost that may need to be made in other sections of the agreement. But we're in agreement with covering Chatham Park's share of the cost in excess of the indebtedness. And we all hope there won't be any, but I certainly understand the reality of that possibility.
Well, if it does occur, we'll appreciate your comment.
The theory is that the amount of the loan will be determined after you have bid the contract, got a price. Presumably the contract will have an allowance for rock or some other kinds of unanticipated consequences. Presumably the budget will have a contingency line item as well, and the loan will be based upon those numbers. It's possible that rock allowances can be exceeded. It's possible that other contingencies can come up that were not necessarily anticipated, so it's entirely possible that it could happen. But hopefully it's not going to be an issue. But anyway, it's proposed to be covered in here as well. And the same thing that it's always been, Chatham Park is going to pay its share of the indebtedness by making a check to the town. The town then is going to pay the state. To the extent that the loan allows for that, it's possible that Chatham Park may prepay a significant portion of that because in order to get the capacity that would be reserved by the town upon the payment of that principal debt. Once the payments are made by Chatham Park, then the Chatham Park allocation would be made and reserved to them, which would then be allocated by Chatham Park to the developers as it goes forward in the form of vouchers. The vouchers then would allocate the capacity that Chatham Park is paid for to those respective developments, and then the town would consider any kind of development proposal and assign the allocated capacity to that. So they can't allocate any more than they paid for, so that's the limit on that. So that would probably encourage them to prepay a significant part of that to get the capacity available for their plans to be developed. In the event of default, which is, again, looking at the worst side of it, in the event of a default in the payment of these terms, you'll have security in terms of a letter of credit, which would be a document issued by a North Carolina bank, which would allow, upon notice to the bank that the Chatham Park had failed to pay what it was supposed to pay, then the bank would issue a check to the town for the amount of the letter of credit. You also have a deed of trust on property in the North Village that could be foreclosed upon to get enough funds to satisfy the obligation of Chatham Park. In terms of any other kinds of defaults, the contract provides for notice to each party in the event of a default and an opportunity to cure that. The town would also have the right during any period of Chatham Park's default for non-monetary kinds of reasons that it could withhold any kind of development approvals on projects as it goes forward. So you have some, significant amount of control in terms of the financial part of it and in terms of the development part of it as well, in the event that Chatham Park doesn't live up to its agreement. As far as the capacity fee, that was a concern that you all had. The amount of the capacity fee that Sanford is charging the town has not yet been determined, but will be later on in 2018. This agreement proposes that the town would use its best efforts to negotiate with Sanford to allow for a payment schedule of that capacity fee that will either be based upon some kind of flow requirement of actually wastewater is being sent to Sanford and being treated, or else it will be backloaded so that the payments in the early part of the term would be less and the amount could be caught up in the rear when the flow is greater. So that hopefully there will be no opportunity for a shortfall between the amount that you collect from your customers and the amount that Sanford is charging. But in the event that there were, then Chatham Park is going to pay the 62.5% of that, and the town would have to pay the 37.5% of it. I would be fairly optimistic that some kind of schedule arranged with Sanford to accommodate that. So the quicker the capacity fee is paid, and the quicker both parties don't have to worry about that. So that's, if Chatham Park's flow is as they anticipate, then it will be paid off in fairly short order, but you would have at least 25 years to take care of that. And one of the things that has changed since we talked about this before, the term of this agreement, to the extent that Chatham Park does not use the capacity that's been allocated, that their 62.5% of the indebtedness is essentially paid for, if it's not used up within 25 years or whenever this agreement is dated, then that unused capacity would revert to the town. We had talked about 20 years previously, but Chatham Park has agreed to 25. That's the term of the capacity fee, maximum capacity fee payment schedule with Sanford as well. So it's similar to what you've seen before, and the changes are beneficial to the town. But if you have any other questions or concerns, I'd be glad to try to address them.
Our chief proponent.
I have one. Hope it won't be too. Page 5, just a message on number D. This is regard to the access fee and the capital recovery fee. So.
Yes, sir.
Oh, so Chatham Park is being charged no fee?
Yes.
On any of that? On any of this?
Yes.
Why, may I ask, is this, how are we going to keep up any of our infrastructure if we're not collecting any fees?
You will have to do it through
rates.
Rates.
But I brought this up before. What if the amount they save on fees exceeds the amount that they would have put toward the project?
That's a consideration that they are making, I guess, internally in this kind of proposition. The justification, and again, that would be their justification, is that those fees, if they were paid to the town, would be theoretically used by the town to add additional capacity. They're paying the fees to the town to make sure that the additional capacity is created. So rather than trust or allow the town to determine where the additional capacity is provided, this is an arrangement where you've already agreed to go to Sanford. They're going to pay a share of that, and there's no need for additional impact fees to do the same thing that they're proposing to do here.
And what do we do with stage 2, phase 2?
That's all to be determined. Once this 1.25 million gallons of capacity is used up by Chatham Park, it's a new game. And the options are open as far as what to do. I mean, theoretically, you could increase, you can get over some administrative issues. You might increase your flow to Sanford. Might have some kind of regional opportunities there. Might consider Robertson Creek or Haw River.
And on the revenue side, what are opportunities at that point?
Rates for the customers is the first option. To the extent that they need more than 1.25 million gallons of capacity, then that's a matter for negotiation at that point. If they're going to participate in whatever plans are being done.
Fees from other developers would apply. So we're having
outside of the PDD.
Yeah, we're having a rate study done. Right. I think that will help inform set the rates that other developers will have to pay for access and capital facilities.
The system development fees is what we're going to call these impact fees in the future. To the extent that they would ordinarily be charged in order to expand your capacity. Because Chatham Park is paying to expand your capacity by paying 2.5% of the debt, then they have essentially done what is supposed to be done with the money. So to the extent that there are other developers or other properties that are being developed and are going to use capacity, then you would have the right to charge them the system development fee or impact fee as well. But then you've got to do something with the money. You can't just sit there and put it in the pot. You've got to use it.
Yes, I feel like it shouldn't, if we exceed, what they say when fees exceed the amount of 62% they would have paid, that they're paying, it seems like there should be a cap on it.
Well, they may say that if the fees are less than what they're paying, they should get the difference in money. And that's possible as well. So the advantage to this is we will know whenever the loan amount is determined and the contract is let what it's going to cost to get 2 million gallons of sewer capacity. So that'll be fixed, and it won't be now. It won't be 5 years from now or whenever. So it's going to be a definite thing. But that's if that's the proposal. I know how if you are interested in doing something different, then now's the time to bring it up.
So system development fees in future might be assessed to other developers.
Yes.
Outside of the PDD.
Yes.
But we do have language in here that there's affiliated properties.
Yes.
Outside of the PDD, owned by Chatham Park investors, would also be able to have access to the same allocation, the same wastewater capacity.
Right. For example, Eco Group, they would be an affiliated entity. So even though Chatham Park is not developing that particular piece of property, an allocation that is paid for by Chatham Park would be available theoretically for Eco Group. So I think that's what this is intended to cover. So the Eco Group would not have to pay the system development fee if it's using the Chatham Park investor allocation.
John, are you saying for property outside the PDD or within the PDD, outside the PDD?
That's my question.
Chatham Park could transfer capacity to that developer, but it would be taken from their overall capacity to be used within
Right.
the PDD.
Right. I'm not sure of this, but it's my understanding that Chatham Park Investors owns the property across 5501, but it's not part of the PDD. So theoretically, under this agreement, that property would be eligible to be served by this allocation.
So long as it were annexed first.
Right. Well, they have to ask for annexation. It's up to you whether to do it or not. Although I can't imagine why.
I have a concern with the payment of the capacity fee, Sanford capacity fee. And I would like to amend language in the contract such that I recognize that Chatham Park is committed to fulfill the shortage between rates received in order to pay the capacity fee. They will pay 62.5% of the shortage. It's always been my opinion that they were sharing in the cost of the project to the tune of 62.5%, and that included the capacity fee. And I recognize that the development will generate revenue to cover that cost. But if in fact it doesn't generate enough revenue to cover that cost, that's where the shortage comes in. What I would like to propose is that they commit to pay for that shortage, or pay for the scheduled 62.5% of the scheduled payment, whichever is greater. But that 62.5% plus the town's 37.5% never exceed 100% unless agreed upon. That language caps Chatham Park's obligations to 62.5% of the scheduled value. If development grows and ratepayers take a big chunk of that, then you have to pay 62.5% of the shortage. But in no case will you be less than 62.5% of the facility fee. But you will not be required to pay more either by paying the shortage if it exceeded that amount. The other thing I'd like to see is that there be collateral for the capacity fee payment.
Well, that part's easier than the first part. I mean, you could certainly say that default in the payment of the capacity fee, according to the agreement, whatever that is, would trigger the calling the letter of credit or foreclosure of the deed of trust, either one. If that would satisfy what you're talking about.
Probably would, but those would have to be adjusted to represent that value.
Well, that's what I think is difficult to grasp, because I don't know what that value is. Because we don't know what the payment schedule is going to be.
Right.
We could have an annual payment schedule which would fit your scenario, but hopefully we won't have an annual payment schedule that fits that scenario. If we have a scenario that charges a capacity fee based upon the monthly amount of wastewater that's transmitted to Sanford, then there won't be a fixed amount each year. It will be per gallon. And I don't know really how to do what you are proposing to do if that's the way the rate structure is set up. If it were set up on, an annual payment for 25 years, yeah, we might be able to do that. But unless it is that way, I'm not sure how it could be worded to take care of that.
Well, if it were per gallon, if there weren't enough gallons to generate the revenue, then they
But if it's
would-
per gallon, it's so much for however much many gallons go there.
Correct.
And that's all it is.
Oh, you're talking about the payment.
Well, what Sanford is going to charge you could be 62 cents per gallon, or 1,000 gallons, or whatever it is.
Well, this is something we have some control over because we'll be generating the agreement with Sanford as to what his payment schedule will be. And
Sure,
we
right.
could have it as fixed, we could have it, as I've suggested, being minimal at the beginning and escalating towards the end of the period, so as not to put burden on the front end. But that's a payment schedule that the CPI and county can recognize and can work with, and I'm suggesting that 62.5% of that be Chatham Park's obligation. Now, if they generate the revenue through gallons, then that's part of their payment. If they don't, then they make the payment.
I don't believe that's anything we can do tonight.
I'd like to see that text written up.
Better than me.
So, where does this leave us then? Are we looking to Paul Messick to provide additional wording to address Mike Kyoto's concerns? Are there further concerns that we want to go ahead and express at this point to Paul Messick? Is there clarity then about what the direction is? Are you saying that it would be difficult to perform that function?
Probably not. Once we get the formula down, it won't be difficult to do the function, but getting the formula is probably going to take a little while.
Do we have to agree to the formula before executing?
We have to agree to a process, whether we know the dollars involved or not. I mean, I think Mr. Fiocco is saying that, assuming that there is a fixed capacity fee payment, that Chatham Park is going to pay 62.5% of that, less the revenue generated by Chatham Park customers that the town receives the revenue from. Is that misstating what you said? Well, that assumes then that Chatham Park customers can be tracked by the town, the amount of revenue can be tracked and calculated and applied to whatever the capacity fee is. And knowing what the capacity fee is now is difficult because we don't know what it is. It could be a number of different things. But we can probably have some alternatives options in this contract.
I would think the tracking won't be difficult. We've identified what Chatham Park's property is in the master plan, and this contract adds other opportunities for other parcels, but it will clearly, if the sewer is allocated, it'll be to Chatham Park's property, so we can identify that.
That's the easy part.
Is there a reason to remain here, or do we go on to the manager's update?
Here, if I could, I'd like to make a suggestion. If this agreement overall, Chatham Park, if this agreement's only stagnated because of the guarantee of Sanford, I would say if you guys could make action on the document as it is, predicated on us solving a satisfactory guarantee agreement for the capacity, whether that be with
Paul, or whether that be with Sanford, or whether that be with another guarantee. How, because I think if that's the only issue, Mr. Fiocco, I think we can accommodate that.
That is the only issue I have.
And you guys,
Because I think
It's going to take some.
I know, but I
all
mean,
without it.
but I mean, as far as we're down to the guarantee agreement on capacity.
Well, if you want to consider approving it subject to that being resolved, then we can certainly do that. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to resolve it right at the moment.
And subject to that resolution would be bringing it back to the board.
Right.
That's the only issue I have. I mean, granted, I understand that we are also modifying the language that says Chatham Park is responsible for the cost of the Sanford improvements plus or in addition to the indebtedness.
We okay with that?
How about including?
Including. What did I say?
Basically, overruns contingencies, 62.5%.
Yeah.
So I guess if we're down to a guarantee agreement, we can't ratify that in some kind of motion. Obviously, the agreement that's in place, we agreed that that's satisfactory, predicated on a guarantee agreement. I mean, the guarantee agreement could be us. Would it be satisfactory if we worked out the guarantee agreement with Sanford? Because indebtedness is due to them.
Well, but you're not obligated.
That's what I'm saying. We would make ourselves obligated.
Right. Well, I think you need to make yourselves obligated to the town.
Okay. Whatever method for guarantee, I don't think we'll have a major problem overcoming that. And we could leave that up to Paul or Ken to provide some kind of method of how would best work for the town.
Paul, you understand my objective?
Hmm?
Is this a vital part of the movement forward with respect to approval of other documentation as well, and as to the approval of the loan from the state?
I think so. If the language is agreeable to Chatham Park, and from Paul's perspective, it can be agreeable to the town with your blessing, that it would be a matter of taking that to the state and then starting the environmental review process with them, because there's a clock ticking on that. So,
Just prefer not to wait till January.
we could start setting public hearing, because it's a public hearing that's required in January. We could set that public hearing in January, probably the second meeting. And that would start getting the ball over the goal line as far as the design process is concerned.
The town has been advised that the state would like to see something that, not necessarily something that you have voted on or signed, but that is generally agreeable to you. And maybe this would be sufficient for that purpose. But eventually, the local government commission will want to see a signed document. But to do the environmental stuff, you don't need that. But they do need to know that there is some essential agreement between Chatham Park and the town.
I'll make a motion to approve the agreement with the added language that Chatham Park is going to pay 62.5% of the Sanford improvements, including the indebtedness. That they will pay 62.5% of the capacity fee, and that there will be collateral provided for the capacity fee.
Okay.
Motion by Michael Fiocco. Is there a second?
You can read back.
I think.
Or repeat.
You want to do it? I think Mr. Fiocco's made a motion to approve the agreement subject to Chatham Park being willing to pay 62.5% of the cost of the Sanford improvements, including the state revolving fund loan indebtedness, pay 62.5% of the capacity fee owed to Sanford, or be assured of paying that, and to provide collateral for both the indebtedness to the state revolving fund and also for the payment of the capacity fee. Is that right?
Yeah.
Second.
Seconded by Jay Farrell. Is there further discussion, or are we ready to vote? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll work out the collateral agreement that I think will be satisfactory to everyone. Thank you very much.
Brian Grisbeck, we're ready for an update.
Thank you. Updates, apologize, we're not in fact, I emailed those out later, but the same documents up on your screen. Hearn Road, we have received 3 proposals. Staff will be meeting on those proposals to make the water main improvements, as discussed previously, I believe Wednesday of this week. So we hope to have something in front of, recommendation in front of the town board in January on that. Impact fees, we released the RFQ back in November. I received 4 responses today. And so I'll be reviewing those with Heather and Davenport, and then we look to provide a recommendation on those in January as well. And that was Mr. Messick talked a little bit before about how the system development fees, the terminology is kind of that's handed down by the state, and so the impact fees is a nomenclature you're going to see less of. You're going to see more of a reference to system development fees. So I'm trying to kind of keep myself in that habit as well. Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin mentioned the Affordable Housing Committee meeting. They meet on the first Thursday of each month, most recently on the 7th. We did discuss some goals. I don't think we elected any officers, but I think that would be sort of as well. I think we've got a pretty good candidate in our midst right now for one of the positions, but I don't want to put the pressure. Staff changes. I emailed last week. Randy Heard resigned as wastewater treatment plant supervisor. We wish him luck. We're excited, though, that Jamie McLaurin has been with us for a little bit over 5 years as the interim wastewater plant supervisor. We've posted the vacant position. We'll be making a decision on that probably within a few weeks. Hopefully, depending on the feedback that we receive. Public art, there is I believe that's changed now. There was an email that went out, and don't quote me on the date on that. It's now the 20th, I think, for Penguin Place, the art reveal on that. So we're kind of excited to see what those look like. Russet Run traffic circle. Staff will be coming forward with some recommendations on how to process that. There is a piece of art that's been locally commissioned. I think you all have talked about it during one of the workshop meetings. So there'll be we'll be having some more information on that coming up probably in January as well. New Town Hall, we're going to be completing the topographic survey, and there's the work that goes into that will mainly involve some utilities, location of utilities, not just town utilities, but also power, gas, electric, and things like that we have a pretty good idea on, but we don't have a complete picture. In order to really begin some of the nuts and bolts design, Hobbs kind of needs that information. So Advanced Niche will be completing that for us here locally. And then also, probably in early January, we're going to be looking at conducting meetings with Hobbs with staff on the building program, which will take a look at what kind of staff we have now, what kind of staff we anticipate over a long period of time, or a longer period of time, and and then from that, they'll try to make some space assumptions on different aspects of the operational part of town hall. For instance, offices, cubicle areas, huddle space is a new term that you're hearing now more and more as opposed to conference space, which is kind of a smaller gathering area. So we're going to be getting to that on a staff level in January, and then as we discussed earlier, we'll be coming back to town board and the public on that later. Sanford Force Main, Wooten has been working on that. They're about 90% complete on design. Again, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, we do need to get to work on the environmental review portion of it, and there's another public component of that has to be completed to satisfy the state requirements. And so we'll be coming forward with Wooten, probably making a presentation to us, not the first meeting in January, definitely by the second meeting in January. And not only just to get an update, I think, but also to maybe kill two birds as far as the public hearing is concerned, having a environmental review component is recorded for that. So, upcoming meetings is, of course, January 8th. It seems like I'd expect a meeting somewhere in here to be. It seems like the next meeting is busy, and so January 8th, after the first of the year, is going to be another busy meeting. But just because you see blanks in some of those other areas, I'm sure we're going to be filling in some things there as well. So I mentioned earlier, Mayor Ferry mentioned earlier that Paul Horn is out at conference right at the moment. The memo that was attached as part of the packet kind of outlines some upcoming activities, events related to the Parks and Rec Master Plan. February 12th is when we're kind of penciling in the date to present you with some information that we've gathered as far as that's concerned. We'll talk about next steps from there. So with that, I will tap out and be more than willing to answer any questions or concerns.
February 12th rather than March 6th, or is February 12th to precede March 6th?
Yeah. February 12 days.
Paul's going to give you an actual presentation on the 12th.
And he's hoping to have something in March, week of March 6th for
like workshops to you all and the consultants.
How are we doing on our electric vehicle charging stations?
February 1st is when we have until we spend the money. As I've mentioned to the board before, the estimate that we received from one of the vendors was far in excess of what we had available for a new energy. And so, speaking with Commissioner Bonitz on how to proceed, how he might recommend proceeding forward with that based on his knowledge of electrical vehicle charging stations, and talking to Duke Energy a little bit. I think we probably will make some movement to go ahead with the one vendor that we received as a local vendor on possibly reducing the scope of what we originally approved, fit the $20,000 grant that we received from Duke. So we're going to talk to the vendor and find out where the best location for that site might be based on the resources that we currently have available.
So I was mistaken about it being available only through the end of the year, is that right? It's February now. Any other questions for Brian Brisbane? Then we're down to concerns of commissioners. Dave Farrell?
I don't have any.
Beth Foley?
I do. This is actually called Commissioner. Because I live in Powell Place, and I'm getting a lot of emails about departments that are going to be built there. I just wondered what you can tell me about it, so I know how to respond to people.
We had a meeting, a concept meeting with the department developer last week, and the location is the side of House Springs. They'll likely submit in the first couple of months of next year. They will be holding an prior to submitting. Well, there isn't a public hearing.
Right, but
There'll be a community meeting scheduled through the applicant for sometime in January.
So some people don't want to see it happen at all. There are other people who are happy that it's there. They want to have a mixed income community. But people are concerned about having one way into the apartment complex as opposed to
Traffic impact analysis will be performed.
Okay.
That was discussed last week.
That seems to be one of the main things. It's just the traffic on that road is it's such a difficult road anyways. I've talked about before, that narrow little road, and traffic increases. It's becoming scary.
That was one of our main concerns, traffic impact.
And so I think people are also concerned about having suitable buffers between the apartments and their houses.
Master plan doesn't call for a whole lot.
It'll be based on what the ordinance says. And it may be that when they come before the board, that we can ask them to, that would be one, I mean, they won't be required to, but perhaps.
Yes.
So the other thing, I don't know if you guys received the dumpster update. I think they went out to everybody. So this seems like it's happening on a continual basis. Oh, you didn't get it? Okay, so the dumpster that's over near Main Street Station.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a continual problem with people dumping things there. The owner of the property is not doing anything about it. The town keeps coming in and cleaning up. It just seems like, is there a way we can start fining them or requiring them to do, what does the ordinance say about, are they required to have a gate around it?
Yeah, I mean, the town's never come in and cleaned that up. We've had the police, we've had the police car located out there, and it seemed to help. A police car located out there to kind of commingle in the area without an officer necessarily in the police car. And that seemed to help for a little while, but it's a combination, I think, between, unfortunately, some of the existing property owners and people dumping in the neighborhood at that dumpster. So it's a little bit of both, if we're honest.
But ultimately, it's the business's responsibility to keep it clean.
Right.
So what can we do to enforce that?
We've had one conversation with them. I think that probably stimulated, he probably went out and called you guys after that conversation in response. So we can have another conversation, but as long as you have the wherewithal to want to enforce that, then we can go ahead and make attempts to enforce it. But just be prepared for a phone call from the property.
What kind of phone call from the property?
Complaining that staff can't deal with people and things like that. We're the bad guy.
So the request that I made is that he put locks on the dumpster and equip all housekeepers with locks. And then any public dumping that occurs will be explicit and blatant. And I hate to ask this of town police, but we could find addresses and charge people for littering.
The property owner would have to make that complaint himself, number one. And number two, we can't, as a town, require that they put locks on their dumpsters.
And he's responsible regardless.
But we can require them when they're developing it to have proper enclosure and screening and stuff like that. Is that right?
To some extent, yes, but the property owner is still responsible for littering on the premises.
So if he's not taking responsibility for all the garbage that's getting dumped there, what kind of recourse do we have?
He can restrict access to his dumpster. It's for his benefit that the dumpster is there.
Commissioner Bonus makes an excellent suggestion, but it's at the end of all of that, it's on the property owner to actually take that suggestion and follow through with it.
So, but if he doesn't, it sounds like he's not willing to do. anyway? I mean, does he get fined? What, because he's not complying, then no, no problem.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to answer that right now. I think the first step would be to make another determination. If there is some sort of violation of one of our ordinances, then move forward from there.
That'd be great. Maybe see if we can come up with some options, see what other communities might do.
It's all we're able to do with our existing ordinances.
Yes, that's all I have.
Thank you. Brian, Teresa, looking great. Thank you.
Oh, I don't.
Well, I get to complain to you. I get to. Thank you.
Thank you also for all the work that went into the parade. It was a nice event.
Yeah, some neat photographs.
There again, great photographs too, by the way, from your end. I think really pleased with staff's involvement and dedication to this annually. The police department put in a lot of work. Heather had things organized pretty well as far as stepping off. That's never been a problem. This was maybe the first, even the crowd, I think I'd give kudos to the crowd. This is the first year I really didn't have people driving it. That's my biggest worry, is people kind of going out into the street and fetching candy. Everyone was well behaved.
I was so impressed that we were throwing this candy out, and I was afraid it was going to create this, kids fighting. But I saw over and over again, kids would get candy and then they were sharing it with the other kids.
And thanks to you guys too. Smiles on your faces and waving there.
It was really fun. Miss John,
It's always a fun having to share anything.
Miss Joe.
I don't have anything, but just to say, it was great. The parade was great. We really do appreciate it. And I just love it. I love Savannah. It was just so good. And thank you all so much.
So what did you find was the different Santa this year? Where did you find the
I was just calling to say I don't even know his name. Believe it or not, there's a whole workforce composed. There ought to be a union. There is. Really surprised at how many available Santas there are over there. Just glad I don't have to do it.
You got potential.
I understand you did one year.
Yeah,
You did. John?
Mr. Royal, I'm glad you're here. I'm curious where we stand on, there was a process to some new certification to get national security clearance of some level to look at documents regarding the coffer dam, is that what it's called?
The dam on the
water
Hall
intake?
Yeah, we are waiting from FERC to give us certification to review inspection reports, and they just told us you're going to have to wait. Slow process.
Was there a national security level, like clearance or some certificate you needed to acquire first?
The town needs to acquire a clearance, a certification to look at this infrastructure.
And that's what we're waiting on?
That's what we're waiting on. We've been informed that we're in line.
And they understand that this is critical infrastructure?
Yeah, that's why we have to. That's why we have to get this, because it's considered critical. We contact them from time to time asking them,
thank you,
where are you in this?
Thank you. What's FERC again?
Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
They protect the fish and the fowl at the dam, in the river. The fish and the fowl.
If there's...
They protect the infrastructure for the energy.
So that it doesn't adversely impact the fish and the fowl.
Oh, no, that's what I care about.
We all care about the fish and the fowl now, remember that.
If there's nothing further, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Beth Wilson Foley, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please say aye.